Founder named Jyoti Bansal sold his company for $3.7 billion. He later called it the saddest day of his life. The company was AppDynamics, and he had spent 9 years building it. In January 2017, it was 2 days away from going public. The IPO price range was set, and Wall Street was watching because it was about to be the first tech IPO of the year. Then Cisco called and offered almost double what the company had last been valued at. Bansal said yes. Around 400 of his employees became millionaires overnight. Dozens walked away with 5 million or more. That's the strange thing about selling a startup. It's the outcome everyone says they want, and the founders who get it are often the ones warning you about it. Part of the reason is emotional, and we'll get to that. But a bigger part is money. Between the press release and the wire, there are holdbacks, adjustments, payouts that stretch over years, and people in line ahead of you. From the banking side, you can watch it happen because the announcement says one number and what shows up in the account over the next couple years is a smaller one. I'll come back to Bansal because his regret was never about the money. For most founders, the money alone holds enough surprises. Start with the day the deal closes. Say a startup sells for $100 million. The founder doesn't take home anything close to that. They only own a slice of the company to begin with, and even that slice arrives in pieces, on a schedule written into the deal before anyone signs. On the day the deal closes, between 65 and 80% of the price gets paid out. That's the biggest piece, and for many founders, it's the only piece they can count on. Another 10 to 15% goes into escrow. Escrow is money the buyer holds back, usually for 12 to 18 months, in case problems show up after the sale. If a customer sues or the taxes were filed wrong, or something the seller promised turns out not to be true, the buyer covers the cost out of that held back money. If nothing goes wrong, that money gets paid out when the time is up. Then there's the working capital adjustment, which almost nobody outside of these deals has heard of. When a buyer agrees on a price, they're assuming the company will be handed over in a normal shape, with money customers owe the company, products on the shelf, and the bills the company owes its vendors, all at the usual levels. After closing, accountants from both sides spend 2 to 4 months composing what the company had against the number written into this agreement. If the company came up short, the price gets adjusted down after the founder already signed. The company's cash and debt get counted separately, and those can change the final amount too. And if the deal includes an earnout, part of the price isn't owed yet at all. More on that in a minute. Add all of that up, and on software deals between $150 and $300 million, earnouts and working capital adjustments alone regularly cut what the founder takes home by 10 to 25%. That's before the two biggest costs of all. The first is investors. If the company raised venture money, those investors sign contracts that decide who gets paid first when the company sells. We covered those terms in our funding video, but the short version is that the founder stands near the back of the line. Second is taxes. A founder can lose a third or more of what's left to federal and state taxes, depending on where they live and how the company was set up years earlier. So the headline said the founder sold for $100 million. What the founder got was their share of whatever was left after the escrow, the adjustment, the investors, and the taxes. And it arrives spread out over 1 to 3 years. This is the part that surprises first-time founders, because the number they told their family is not the number that arrives. And of everything in the contract, one term costs founders more than all the others. An earnout is a piece of the purchase price you only receive if the company hits targets after the sale. The targets are usually a revenue number, a customer count, or a product getting shipped, and the payments run over 1 to 3 years. On paper, it sounds fair. The buyer says, "We'll pay you the rest if the business does what you promised it would do." The founder, confident in the company they built, says fine. Then the founder learns the part nobody explains up front. The buyer runs the company now. The buyer sets the budget, chooses whether the sales team selling your product gets moved to something else, and decides whether your product stays a priority at all. So hitting the targets your money depends on is now up to a company you don't control. In traditional software deals, it's common for earnouts to pay out only a fraction of the full target, because the buyer changed plans after the sale. Nobody broke the contract either. The buyer made normal decisions for its own business, and the targets became unreachable anyway. So a founder can spend the next 2 years working for the company that bought them, with no say in the decisions, while the money they're owed keeps getting smaller. The deals that protect founders keep the earnout small or leave it out entirely, with most of the price paid in cash at close. Whether a founder can get a deal like that depends on choices made years before the offer arrived, and we'll come back to that at the end. But every sale has a step that happens first, and it decides more deals than the negotiating does. The buyer does their homework. Before they pay a dollar, their accountants and lawyers go through the company's records. They read the contracts, check tax filings, and look at what money came in and where it went. usually going back 2 full years. It's called due diligence, and a messy company loses deals and money right here. One founder built a software product, mostly solo, and grew it to $30,000 a month in revenue. A buyer came knocking, but the founder had run everything through a personal checking account and a spreadsheet, so there were no clean records to hand over. It took 3 months and about $40,000 in accounting fees to rebuild 2 years of books. The deal still closed, but at a lower price, because the buyer couldn't be sure of how much of that revenue was profit. A company like 𝐸, for example, built something for exactly that moment. Qualifying startups can apply for a free Delaware incorporation right inside 𝐸 in a few minutes without ever leaving the application. It's attorney reviewed, and banking and cards are live as soon as you're set up, even before your EIN. So the company starts with clean books and one place to watch every number, instead of a cleanup job later. Links in the description if you want to check it out. Now, in every deal so far, somebody bought the whole company. In the last 2 years, a new kind of exit showed up, and for the employees, it can be a much worse deal. In March 2024, Microsoft paid about $650 million to a startup called Inflection AI, but Microsoft didn't buy Inflection. It paid for a license, which is the right to use Inflection's AI models, and it hired the founder and most of the team. A few months later, Google did a version of the same thing with Character.AI, and a licensing deal reported at $2.7 billion. The two founders and part of the research team went back to Google, and the company they started kept running without them. That same summer, Amazon hired the founders and much of the team from a startup called Adept, paid for the same kind of license, and never bought the company at all. Why would a giant company pay billions and not take the company? The big company gets the people and the technology without ever owning the startup, and without the government review a real purchase could face. The government asked whether that was the point and looked into both the Microsoft and Google deals. By then, the deals were already done. These deals get reported like acquisitions, and the headline number looks like a purchase price. But who ends up getting paid is different. The founders come out of it well, because the deals are built around them. They get hired into big jobs, and in the Character.AI deal, the founder reportedly made hundreds of millions. The investors got their money back in all 3 deals, either bought out at a profit or repaid out of the license money. What happens to the employees is harder to pin down, because there's no single agreement covering them. In a normal acquisition, the deal contract spells out what happens to every employee's shares, and the whole team gets paid together. In these licensing deals, only part of the team gets hired away, and everyone left behind is counting on whatever the company decides to do with the license money. Character.AI reportedly used part of Google's payment to buy out investors and pay employees for their shares, as they earned them over time, and about 1 in 5 employees moved to Google. The rest stayed behind at a company that had lost its founders and its best-known researchers. Employees at other startups in these deals have done worse, and in every version, the headline was a licensing payment, not a price for the company or the team's shares. If you ever join a startup partly for the stock, this is the version of an exit to ask about. And if you're a founder, know that your team reads those headlines too. But set all of that aside and imagine your sale as the clean kind, where the whole company gets bought, the terms are good, and the money is enormous. There's one more cost, and it surprises the winners most of all. Go back to Jyoti Bansal. His deal was about as good as deals get. He had another path since the IPO was ready to go. The price was nearly twice what the company had last been valued at, and it was mostly cash. Hundreds of his employees were taken care of. He signed it, went to the celebration party at the office, and walked home sad. Those were his words. He had spent 9 years fully dedicated to the company, and suddenly it was the end of a chapter. He spent months traveling afterward and couldn't shake the feeling that AppDynamics could have become something much bigger, and that he sold before the job was finished. He ended up starting another software company, Harness, and said he'd almost certainly turned down a similar offer for it. Talk to founders who sold, and the same things come up over and over. They miss building more than they expected to. Running the company was what their whole life was built around, and the money doesn't replace that. The team they spent years building breaks apart. Some of the people disappear into the big company. Some leave, and the thing they made together stops being theirs, and the freedom goes away almost immediately. A founder who ran their own company now needs approval for hiring, spending, and product decisions from managers at a company they didn't choose. Founders who stay through an earnout describe it as the longest 2 years of their careers. Most of them also share the same regret about the money. They wish they had figured out what they would take home after the investors and the escrow and the taxes before they fell in love with the headline number. Plenty of founders find out what they'll get after they've already signed. None of this means selling is wrong. It means the sale costs the founders things that never show up in the offer letter. And most founders don't add those up until afterward. So what does the good version look like? The sales that founders are glad they made have a lot in common, and none of it happens during the sale itself. The first is more than one interested buyer, because nothing raises a price like another buyer at the table. A single buyer knows they're the only option, and the terms show it. The second is a clean cap table, which means the ownership records are simple, the investor terms are standard, and no early investor got special rights that let them block or steal a sale. Founders who gave away too much in the early rounds find out during the sale that all those investor payouts add up, and they come out of the price first. The third is mostly cash at close, with little or nothing riding on an earnout. And the last is clean books, so due diligence takes weeks instead of months, and nothing turns up that hands the buyer a reason to cut the price. Every one of those gets built years before the sale. A founder who raised carefully, held onto their ownership, kept clean records, and grew the company to where it didn't need a buyer can say no to a bad offer. That option is what forces a buyer to pay. Bansal could have walked away and rung the bell at the stock exchange 2 days later, and Cisco knew it. That's part of why the offer came in at nearly twice the company's last valuation. Without that position, there's no negotiation. One buyer, messy books, and a line of investors waiting to be paid first means accepting whatever deal gets offered and finding out later what it was worth. Selling a startup can still be the right move. Bansal's sale changed 400 families' lives in one day, and he'll defend the decision even while he tells you it made him sad. But the headlines leave most of that out. They skip the escrow and the adjustments and the taxes, the earnouts that pay a fraction of what was promised, and the deals that pay the founders far more than the team. And they never mention how sad the winners can feel afterward. If a sale is in your future, the time to prepare for it is now. While the books are clean, the ownership is simple, and nobody needs the money. Qualifying startups can apply for a free Delaware incorporation right inside Row. Attorney reviewed with banking and cards live as soon as you're set up. Links in the description. And if this video convinced you that you'd rather build a company you never have to sell, watch our video on the new era of startup funding next. It breaks down how founders are raising millions while keeping control of the companies they started. See you there.